Good morning. My name is Claire Clark and I am from Dynham. We are supporting Highlands and Islands Enterprise to deliver this event today. It's great to have you all with us for this NEXUS webinar. A very warm welcome to you all. Before I pass you over to Katrina Ramsey from High, I'd just like to spend a minute explaining how we will run today's webinar. As an audience member, you are automatically muted, but we have a couple of ways for you to get actively involved. You can use your question box at any point throughout the webinar, and we will pick up as many as we can during the Q&A. You'll also see an icon called the raised hand icon, and during question time, if you've got a mic and you want us to take you off mute so you can connect directly with our speakers, then just click on that icon and we'll get you connected. And finally, we always want to promote knowledge sharing and collaboration, so we do record every session. We will, of course, share the recording after the event, so you can watch again or share with anyone else you think might be interested. That's all from me now. I'll pass you over to Katrina, who will introduce today's speakers. Katrina.
Hello, and thank you, Claire. I'm Katrina Ramsey, and I work as part of the Northern Innovation Hub team at Highlands and Islands Enterprise in Inverness. NEXUS is our co-working space for life sciences and technology companies, and it's based at our Inverness campus and funded by both European and Inverness City Region Deal funding. The NEXUS webinar series is a great opportunity to find out what's going on in the life sciences and technology community and for making connections. So today I'm delighted to introduce you to Elizabeth Leonard, Director and Head of Corporate Tax at French Duncan. And Elizabeth will tell us about research and development tax credits, and later on she'll be joined by Sharon Kinney and Lisa Scott in the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Elizabeth, who will tell us more.
Perfect, thank you very much. Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for giving up your time to attend our short presentation on R&D Tax Relief. I am Elizabeth Leonard, and as Katrina had said, I am a director in the corporation tax team at French Duncan, and I also head up the corporate tax offering that we provide. With me today, I have two of my colleagues. I have Sharon Kinney and Lisa Scott. Both Sharon and Lisa have in-depth practical experience of providing R&D services to our clients, and they have been helping our clients with R&D for, I will just say, many years, as opposed to offend them by putting a number on it. So unfortunately, Sharon is unexpectedly being called away, but we are hoping that she will be back. But she is more than willing to pick up any questions after the event that Lisa and I might not be able to help with, but I'm sure we will be fine. Sorry, Claire, I'm just trying to, there we go, that's fine. So by way of introduction to this session, Highlands and Islands Enterprises are aware that not everybody who applies for a grant or funding will be successful, and so they have been looking at alternative ways of effectively providing you with funding to carry out your projects. And one of those funding methods is R&D Tax Relief. So we've been asked to provide you with an introduction to the relief. What is it? What would qualify? With all things tax related, there are many if, buts and maybes involved in this relief, and so I do apologise in advance if something that you were specifically looking to be covered isn't, but please do use the Q&A session that will follow this presentation, and we will hopefully deal with any questions that you do have. So first of all, just as a quick recap, and this pains me to say this because I remember it being introduced, R&D Tax Relief was introduced by the then government in the year 2000, and it was introduced as a way to encourage scientific and technological innovation within the UK. The relief is a corporation tax relief, and it might reduce your company's tax liability, or in some circumstances, if you're loss-making, you can claim for a payable tax credit to be given to you by Hmrc. So it's not often that you get money back from the government, and so it is a useful relief to bear in mind. From a tax perspective, R&D is deemed to have taken place when a project is seeking to achieve an advance in science and technology, and in order to achieve that advance, you have to have resolved a scientific or technological uncertainty. Now, we will come on and look at this definition a bit more closely, but before we do that, I think it's important just to specify some of the conditions that you have to think about and you have to meet in order for you to be able to even make an R&D claim in the first place. So first and foremost, in order to claim R&D tax relief, you have to be a company. It's only a corporate entity that can make a claim for this relief. The company has to be a going concern, and trust me, this has been more difficult as we've come through the COVID pandemic, and trying to show that companies are a going concern is an area of complexity. The company has to be within the charge to UK corporation tax. The company has to be carrying out R&D for the purposes of its trade or a future trade. So if you are commencing to prepare to trade, you can still claim R&D relief if all of the other conditions are met. And for any costs to be included in an R&D claim, the expenditure has to be deductible for corporation tax purposes. So it's usually things that will go through your P&L, or we can make a claim for an intangible to be treated as a revenue expense, regardless of how it's gone through your accounts. We would always ask anybody that we are speaking to with regards to R&D to take advice. There are some complexities hidden in there that if you get them wrong, they can impact the relief that you're entitled to claim. So if you have any grant funding or any other subsidies, if you are being subcontracted your R&D work, or you are using subcontractors to carry out your R&D work, if you are looking at things that are not perhaps revenue in nature and you want to see if you can make a claim for them, then I cannot stress the importance enough of speaking to your advisors just to make sure that you're getting your claims correct from the outset. So R&D relief allows companies that are carrying out qualifying R&D to claim an extra CT deduction for certain expenditure or to surrender losses in return for a payable credit. Now, the level of the relief that you are entitled to claim is dependent on whether you would qualify under the small and medium-sized enterprise scheme or whether you would fall under the research and development expenditure credit scheme. The SME scheme, as it's commonly called, is more generous. The reliefs are bigger, and so for the most part, people will want to fall under the SME scheme where they can, because it's worth more to them. I'm not going to go into the numbers at the moment, but we can take you through that if anybody has a specific question with regards to that. In order to determine whether you would fall under the SME scheme or the RDEC scheme, basically what we are looking at is we are looking at the size of your company, and there are a couple of thresholds that you have to meet in order for you to be deemed to be a small and medium-sized enterprise, which will enable you to claim under the SME scheme. So the first thing that we look at is the number of employees that you have. So what is your head count? If you have less than 500 employees, then you tick that box and you move on to the next test. And the next test is, in order to be deemed to be an SME, you have to have either an annual turnover of less than 100 million euros or a balance sheet total of less than 86 million euros. Now, in theory, that's very easy if you are a standalone company, because you are only looking at your own data and you will have an oversight of your own data. Where it gets a bit more complicated is if you have external corporate investors or if you are part of a group, because depending on the shareholdings that you either hold in another company or another company holds in you, you will have to have access to their data, because their data will be combined with your own in order to determine whether you are still a small or medium-sized enterprise. So is it important that you are familiar with your shareholders and your group as a whole, because that's one of the tests that we will look at in order to determine what it is that we're allowed to claim for you. So going back then to the definition of R&D, R&D has a specific statutory definition for tax purposes that is slightly different to what you would think it would be if you were looking at it from an accounting perspective, say, or a commercial perspective. And so the two parts to the definition are that you are seeking to achieve an advance in science or technology, and to achieve that advance, you are looking to resolve a scientific or technological uncertainty. So if we look at advance first and foremost, an advance is defined as effectively an advance in the overall knowledge or capability in the field of science or technology that you work in, and not merely your own knowledge and your own capability. Now that again gets a bit more complicated, where you have a competitor and that competitor has did something that you just don't know how to do. And from a trade secret perspective, they're not going to share that with you, and you have to get yourself then up to speed, and you have to work out basically how they have done that. So that in itself can still be deemed to be R&D. So even though the advance has already been made, you are allowed to try and work out how they've done that, and you can still claim that as an R&D project. An advance can have tangible and intangible consequences. So just because you can't see the outcome or feel the outcome or touch the outcome, it doesn't necessarily mean that your project won't qualify. So things like creating a new process, as an example, could still be deemed to be R&D. And I'm hoping that the slides get shared with you, because we have put some examples up on that slide that could give you an idea of what we mean by that when we say that you don't have to have tangible consequences. Now, the second part of the definition of R&D is that there has to be a scientific or technological uncertainty that you have resolved. And I guess from my perspective, the easiest way for me to describe this is it's that scratch of your head moment when you are looking at getting involved in a project and you know what you need to achieve, but you have to stop and you have to ask yourself, can this scientifically be done? Or I think this scientifically can be done, but I just don't know how to do it. And Hmrc use this really derogatory term called the competent professional. And if you have a competent professional within your field and they don't know how to do it, then you would generally find that that project would 9 times out of 10 fall to be deemed to be R&D. I guess an important thing to raise is that failure is good in the R&D world. So if you have an idea and for the life of you, you just can't get it to work and you decide to park it, that can still be deemed to be R&D from a tax perspective. The fact that you've not been able to achieve it doesn't mean that the work that you've done up until that point can't be classed as R&D. From a practical perspective, I guess the analysis of all of the work that you're doing, so the projects and the activities that you're involved in, and whether those projects and activities would be deemed to be R&D relief, is usually the area where people will ask us the most questions, because they want to be sure that what they're doing would be deemed to be R&D from a tax perspective. Experience from our part has shown that speaking to your advisor early in the process will help you to maximise your claim. So rather than just sitting there and thinking, is what I'm doing R&D, sometimes sitting down and asking yourself questions around the project that you're involved in and speaking to your advisor will help you to ascertain whether what you're doing is or isn't R&D. And so the questions usually that you should be thinking about are things like, is the project that you are working on seeking an advance in the field of science or technology? Does the advance extend overall knowledge or capability in the field of science or technology, and not just your own state? And does the project involve an uncertainty that competent professionals can't readily resolve and where solutions are just not common knowledge? So once you've got to the point that you have identified the projects that would be qualifying R&D projects from a tax perspective, in order to make a claim, the next thing that you have to try and quantify is what is the level of your claim? So what costs are you allowed to claim as part of your R&D tax relief? The costs are very helpfully from Hmrc put into certain buckets, and we've put those buckets on the screen just now for you to see. So what we would normally do is go through these cost buckets with you and determine whether you have any costs in these categories that we would be able to include in the claim. The most common and probably the biggest part of any claim that we will ever do is the director and employee costs. The R&D is being undertaken by your staff, and so usually that's where the biggest cost will sit. So the types of costs that you can claim are any salary costs that you pay to your directors and employees, wages, the Class 1 NIC element, and also any pension contributions that you're paying on their behalf. The staff have to be directly and actively engaged in the R&D project, but you can also claim for those that sit in the sidelines and provide a support function to the people that are working on the R&D. So if you are indirectly involved in the R&D project, you are allowed to claim an element of those costs within your claim. So that can be people, say, that work in finance or that are offering admin support. The other costs that we will commonly see are the costs of externally provided workers and subcontractors. There is a debate around who is an externally provided worker and who is a subcontractor and what is the difference. So again, that's something that we can help you navigate through if you find yourself in that situation. The importance of subcontractor cost is depending on the finer details of your relationship with the subcontractor, you may find yourself taken out of the ability to claim under the SME scheme. So even though size-wise you meet the criteria, there are instances where the fact that you have a specific relationship with the subcontractor, that would mean that you're taken out of the SME scheme and you have to make any claim under the large company scheme, so the RDEC scheme. So again, speaking to your advisors early if you find yourself in that situation where you do have subcontractors is really important. I touched upon this earlier in terms of the expenditure, and I said that in order to be deemed to be a qualifying cost from an R&D perspective, the costs have to be allowable from a corporation tax perspective. So usually we will include costs that are revenue in nature, so costs that have gone through your P&L. If you have some software costs, say, that have been categorised as an intangible fixed asset, there are claims that we can make, so albeit in your accounts, they will have been treated as capital because they've been treated as intangible fixed assets. We can make a claim to bring them within the R&D regime, so we can say that these are revenue in nature. Unfortunately, we are unable to claim any costs that are capital in nature. So if you purchase a piece of plant and machinery, say, that you will be using to undertake your R&D projects, we can't include that in the R&D claim as a qualifying cost, but you might be able to get 100% capital allowance on the cost of that asset. So there are reliefs available, and it's just a case of identifying what your costs are and then understanding what the tax treatment of those costs would be. Another area of complication and another area that can take you out of an SME claim and put you into the large company scheme is where you are in receipt of grants and subsidies in order to help you with the project. If you are not already aware, the SME R&D relief is a notified state aid, and a company can't get any other notified state aid on the same project. So if you have received a notified state aid grant, which is to help you with your project, you are then unable to claim R&D relief under the SME scheme, but you can claim it under the RDEC scheme. Now, it is a bit less generous, but it is a relief all the same. So it is worth considering claiming under the RDEC scheme if it turns out that your grant is a notified state aid. In terms of grants that you're receiving, it is easy enough to ask the provider, because they will be able to tell you if that grant that you have received is an SME grant. Some of the more common examples that we will see of notified state aids are RSA grants, SMART grants. Some of the furlough support that you received is also considered state aid, and also innovation grants. Now, one of the things that you can do is, if you're carrying on a number of R&D projects and you have received a grant that you would say is allocated to a specific project, then you can make a case that it's only that one project that gets tainted, and it's only that one project that will come out of the large company scheme, and the rest of your projects can stay within the SME scheme, and the one that's received the notified state aid we would claim under the RDEC scheme. So again, it's important that any advisor that you engage with to help you with your R&D claim is aware of any support that you have received in order to help you with your project. So it might be that the grant that you have received and the subsidy that you've received is not considered to be notified state aid. And in that example, the way that the legislation works is, if for example you had qualifying costs of 100,000 that you spent on a qualifying R&D project, and you received a de minimis state aid grant of 30,000 that wasn't notified state aid, the way that the claim would work is the costs that were covered by the grant, so your 30,000 of costs, you would be able to make a claim for R&D under the RDEC scheme in respect of that 30,000 that was funded, but the balance of the qualifying costs, so the 70,000 that you've got left, you're still entitled to make a claim for that under the SME scheme if you are deemed to be a small or medium-sized enterprise. So all is not lost, and therefore it is important that we ask the questions with regards to what kinds of grants and fundings have you received, where does it sit, and what impact will that have on any R&D claim that you will be making. So I suppose you've identified your qualifying projects, you know what your costs are and what the size of your claim will be, and the next question that you might have is, well, how then do you make this R&D claim? And effectively, an R&D claim is made in your tax return. There's some additional boxes that you now have to tick on your CT 600. And what that means, though, is that because we make that claim in your tax return, effectively, you can only make a claim in a period that is deemed to be an open period. And basically what that means is that you have 2 years after the end of your accounting period in order to make your R&D claim. Now, alongside the boxes that you tick on your CT600, we would also expect to see a report submitted alongside your corporation tax return, which will support your R&D claim. The reports will normally include a calculation of the qualifying costs. They will include some narrative around the work that you've been doing and why you feel it is a qualifying activity. And it was also comment on the methodology that's been used to calculate the value of the claim. So the questions that we would normally expect to see answered in any narrative that we are supplying to Hmrc would be things around what was the scientific or technological advance that you've been seeking to make? What were the uncertainties that you encountered along the way? How did you overcome those uncertainties? And why was it that the knowledge that you were looking for wasn't readily available to a competent professional? So why could they not just Google it or speak to one of their friends that are in the same field to understand how to do something? I'm sure you're all aware that everything changes in tax, and unfortunately R&D isn't any different. So where we are at the moment with regards to what will qualify as R&D and what costs could be included in the claim, they are set to change, and two of the changes that we know are coming are around data and cloud computing costs. Now, this has been a relatively grey area as far as Hmrc are concerned, and there's been a lot of, yes, they can be deemed to be a qualifying cost, no, they can't be deemed to be a qualifying cost, and we've finally got to a position where Hmrc have agreed that data and cloud computing costs will be considered allowable expenditure for R&D relief. They have also looked at R&D that's taken place overseas, and what Hmrc have announced is that if you are undertaking any of your R&D costs overseas, then those costs will be excluded from your R&D claim. Now, at the moment, Hmrc have a bit of a bee in their bonnet, for want of a better expression, about the abuse of the R&D relief, and they are currently considering some anti-abuse measures, and we don't know the finer details of these yet, and we don't know what the implications will be for companies in the future if it is held that these anti-abuse measures will be introduced. So things that they are thinking of introducing are things like all your claims have to be made digitally. You need to inform Hmrc in advance that a claim is being made, and there's some concerns around the timescales of those. Do you have to advise Hmrc just before you make a claim, or do you have to do it before the end of the accounting period? And this can sometimes cause difficulties for our clients, because sometimes it's not until after the event that we review the situation and ascertain that there is an R&D relief available. So we are continuing to monitor these anti-abuse measures, and we will update everybody as soon as we have any more concrete advice really from Hmrc. So in terms of our process and how we approach R&D, usually it's around conversation, because you find out more from your clients from speaking to them. So what we would normally do is, in advance of any discussions that we would be having with you, we would issue a questionnaire that you would work your way through, and then we would talk you through that, understand the work that you're undertaking. If it's appropriate, we would get a tour of your operations, and once we understand the work that you are doing and we have helped you to identify the projects that would be qualifying R&D, we then begin to prepare the report that supports the R&D claim. And we work with you in order to prepare narratives that we will submit to Hmrc, and we will also work with you to help you identify and calculate the qualifying costs. So sometimes, for example, a staff member that is involved in R&D will not be involved in R&D 100% of the time, and so you can't claim 100% of their staff costs in the qualifying cost category, but it might be that 80% of their time is spent on R&D. So we will have conversations with you to help you identify how much of the costs that you are incurring can be included in your claim. And I think that was all that we wanted to cover, but if anybody does have any specific questions, please do let us know.
That's great. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm just bringing Katrina and Lisa back on to join you. We've had a couple of questions from the audience, but there's still time, so use your question box and ask the team any questions that you may have. But Elizabeth, I think we'll just lead off from a question that we've had in from Keith, and he is asking, how long will it take to receive a research and development tax repayment?
Lisa, do you want to pick that one up? Oh, I think you're on mute, Lisa.
Generally, for an SME claim, it should be 28 days. That is their stated turnaround time. At the moment, there is a delay with them, and they have quoted a 40-day turnaround. But RDEC claims, that's different. They don't have a set time limit on those, and it can take several months actually to get them processed and put through.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, a question in from another member of the audience. What are the different ways in which R&D tax credit can be paid out? Oh, good question.
If it's an SME claim and the company has made a loss, they can surrender part or all of that loss subject to restrictions for an R&D tax credit. If they've made a profit, depending on the level of their claim, it could just reduce the corporation tax liability for that year. RDEC as well, if they've made a loss, they can claim the credit back, or again, it can reduce their tax liability. So it just depends on the circumstances of how much profit they've made and how much of a loss they've got.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Next question, what impact will COVID support have on my ability to make an R&D claim?
Again, you're looking at the type of grant it is. So where staff have been furloughed, obviously they're not working during those periods, they're not carrying out R&D activities. So any payments made for furlough periods need to be excluded from the claim. You won't claim anything for those times when the payments made to the staff during those periods. Where you've got the grants or loans such as the bounce back loan or the business interruption loan, they are classed as notified state aids. So like Elizabeth was saying, where a project has received that, it would push your claim into the RDEC scheme rather than the SME scheme. They're a bit more difficult because generally the ones we've seen in the application, it is for working capital, so that's not for a specific project as such. It's obviously covering all kind of expenses of the company, so it becomes a bit more difficult with those. If your company is primarily R&D activities, then you're looking at that pushing all your projects into RDEC. If you've got a trade and then obviously a very small part of your activity is R&D, there may be an argument that the R&D wasn't funded by it. But again, you would need to kind of look at each company's circumstances and work with your advisor to look at the way forward on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question from Keith. Another Keith. Am I right in thinking is it possible to get a project pre-approved by Hmrc before making a claim?
They did have an advance assurance, which we never kind of really recommended using because it was quite an ordeal to go through, the amount of detail and things that you needed to supply for that. And then if you got the assurance, it was just for that specific project. Again, I think we've done that for a couple of clients, but we didn't really find it worthwhile. It's we would normally just go through the normal kind of channels and put a claim in.
Do you think it's as much work to go through the pre-approved work as it is to actually just make the actual claim?
It was a lot of work and cost to the company before actually making the claim.
And what kind of costs? As in cost and time, or?
Was getting your advisor to do that for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another question. Can I claim R&D relief and a grant?
Yep, obviously as Elizabeth covered, yeah, you can do that, but again, depending on the type of grant received, it will affect your claim. So if a project has received a notified state aid, that would push it into the RDEC scheme. Where it's a de minimis aid, the funded part would go into RDEC, but the unfunded costs could be claimed under SME. Again, we would advise that you take advice before taking any grant to consider what's worthwhile. If it's going to push a whole project into RDEC, depending on how much that grant is for, you might be better not taking it. Also to look at the wording of your grant application to make sure it's specific to a project, so it doesn't taint all the R&D work that you're doing, then you can just take that one project as RDEC and your other projects can still be claimed under the SME scheme. Yeah, always better to take advice before taking any grant out.
Okay, great. Okay, I think that's all the audience questions we have. Lisa or Elizabeth, do you want to say anything else, or Katrina, have you got any other questions?
I suppose I had a question actually. I know you've kind of covered it already, but just to encourage businesses, like, would you say an initial sort of one-to-one conversation would be a useful thing if people are unsure, you know, of whether they're eligible to apply? Would you encourage that?
Yeah, definitely. We're always happy to have an initial call to find out what work a company has been doing, and give them a kind of steer on whether there's potential for a claim to be made.
Excellent, thank you.
I guess all I was going to say was, if anybody is like me, you will turn off your screens and then you'll, oh, I wish I had asked that question. So if you do find yourself in that situation and you do have something that you wanted to clarify, I think if you get in touch with Claire or Katrina, they will be able to forward on any questions, and myself, Lisa and Sharon will be happy to pick them up with you separately.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, of course, anyone who has anything, just get in touch with us and we can put you in the right direction. But thank you so much. That was really interesting, and thank you so much for your time today, Elizabeth and Lisa. And yeah, thanks for all your questions. That was great. I'll just pass you over to Andrea, who'll say the final few words. Sorry, Katrina, sorry.
Don't worry. Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. And thank you so much to Elizabeth and Lisa for a very thorough run through of everything you need to know about R&D tax credits. That was really, really insightful. And honestly, I think it'll be useful having the recording as well as the slides to refer to. So thank you for everything today. And yeah, if anyone does have any questions, please do get in touch with myself or Claire, and we can get back to you. I'd just like to also draw your attention to tomorrow's NEXUS webinar. We've got Darren Gibson from Frontier Science, who's going to be telling you more about what they're doing. And so please do join tomorrow and let others know that it's taking place as well. The other thing I wanted to let you know about is that you've still got time to apply for Pathfinder. The closing date is 8th of August for the next round, so do get your applications in or let others know if you know that they'd be interested. It's a really good business support program for yourselves. And as ever, we would also like to, if you have a particular topic that you would like to be discussed as an NEXUS webinar, please do let us know, and also to provide any feedback. And we look forward to seeing you at a webinar again soon. So thank you for joining today.
Great, thanks so much, Katrina. On behalf of Highlands and Islands Enterprise, a big thank you to everyone that came in to join the webinar. As Katrina mentioned, our post-event survey will pop up straight after this session. So if you can spare a couple of minutes, it would be great if you could complete that for us. Thank you very much for your time and have a great day.